So by now we've got a pretty decent foundation of skills based on our gear check. We're happy to use that equipment, those general tips, and we've got some experience under our belt so that we don't have to put too much effort into doing at least the basic stuff. And we also know that we've been underutilizing or misusing the way that our brain wants to work because of the cave theory that we've already covered. So let's move on now to what I think is one of the big open secrets behind studying efficiently. It's one of those fundamental prerequisites in which if you can't do this bit, you're going to be entering into one of those downward spirals that you're not going to be able to pull yourself out of. And that is the topic of retention. And that retention is king. So when I talk about retention, I'm talking about having effectively a good memory, in that when you read something or absorb information, either from class or from someone saying something to you or from you reading it yourself, you are able to hold on to that information and you're able to hold on to it for a very long time without forgetting. And it may seem pretty obvious, but actually there's some important psychology around retention. And it's not just about having a good memory, it's about when you have the good memory. So let me just demonstrate what I mean with this graph here. So I've just stacked two graphs on top of each other. We've got time on the y-axis for both of them. We've got knowledge on the x-axis for both of them as well. So this yellow line here actually represents being exam ready. So it means having enough knowledge so that you are ready for your exam, which is obviously where we want to be. And for the sake of this graph, let's just say that the exam is here. Where this line is, this is when our exam is. So we need to be exam ready at that yellow line by the time we reach this point in time. So let's have a look at someone who doesn't have a very high initial retention with learning. At the beginning, they know nothing about the topic, so their knowledge will be at 0 here. And then they'll learn a little bit in class, and then they'll forget, and they'll revise it a little bit later. They'll remember some of it, they'll learn a little bit more, and then they'll forget that. And then they're learning a little bit more, and they forget that. And then they're really stressing out, and this is where they're just trying to cram. And let's just say for the happy ending of the story that they do just get to the point where they're exam ready. So what are some of the features that we can see of this graph? Okay, first of all, there's a lot of this up and down, up and down. And all of this up and down is basically time that's wasted. It's, if you kind of imagine you're pushing a boulder up a hill, and these are the hills. All this effort to push the boulder up the hill, and yet it rolls all the way down again, which means that this gap, this difference here, this is effectively what you forgot. Again, this is what we ended up forgetting. This is what we ended up forgetting. So we actually end up learning more than the entire amount of topic in just what we forgot. And what I mean is that we forget so much that most of the time is actually spent on just relearning what we forgot rather than actually learning the new information. So let's actually have a look at that a little bit more in detail. So if I were to highlight in red the areas in which we were learning new information, that would be here, and that would be here, that would be here, and that would be here. Compared to the amount of time that was spent just learning stuff, again, that we'd already forgotten, which was all of this time in between here. So, even without me having to draw it out like this for you, I think you already know intuitively that when you're studying, a lot of that time is spent on just relearning stuff. You remember you learned it in class, you've got notes on it, so clearly at a certain point you've spent time on it, yet you still don't actually have that knowledge, you don't have that retained, it's not at a high level, you don't feel ready for the exam. And the worst part about this is that around about here, maybe around here or so, we start getting stressed because our exam is coming up right around the corner, and that's when we start doing this type of cramming type study, and everything is very unstable, and we're pulling out our hair because we just don't feel like we know anything, and the knowledge is just not sticking no matter what we do, and we're getting super frustrated, and we just want to quit, but then we can't, and so we just try harder and harder, and it just feels like it just doesn't stick no matter what we do. And that super frustrating feeling is actually all stemming from the fact that our retention wasn't high at the very beginning, and we're just doing this cycle of relearning. So what is it like when the retention is high to begin with? So What you do if you were studying well is that you do a little bit of pre-study, which teaches you just a little bit. Not a lot in terms of the actual amount of knowledge that you gain, but it teaches you some very important frameworks to help you organize the information. And that means that when you're in class, you're actually able to gain a lot more knowledge much faster. And then the way that you learn it, which we will cover very soon, don't worry. If you learn it the right way in class, you'll actually retain that knowledge a lot better. And then when you revise it again after class, maybe at the end of the day, you'll be nearly exam ready, and then your knowledge does not fade very quickly. And then maybe a month later, you revise it again, and you're pretty much exam ready, and you're smooth sailing from there. So you can see that we got to the point of being exam ready much earlier. But more importantly, if we look at the time that we spent, the proportion of time that we spent on learning new information was here, and then here, and then just this tiny little sliver up here, right? So we can see that we are spending very little time on learning information that we already had learned before, but then just forgot. So our relearning cycles are a lot less. And the best part about this is that once you're able to actually have a high level of retention to begin with, we can then stack this on top of each other again and again. So around here, we can actually start with a new topic, and we can do the exact same thing. And then we can start another topic, and we can start another topic, and then we can start another topic, and we can start another topic. So that means that by the time we're sitting the exam, we haven't just studied one thing to be exam ready, because we were able to save all of that time that we'd normally spend on just relearning stuff that we forgot. We're able to use all of that time to learn more things, which is why we're able to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times the amount in the same period of time. Now, in reality, can you actually cover 6 times the amount compared to the first person? Actually, probably yes. So realistically, we look at numbers and we see numbers at around 4 to 6 times. So it is actually a lot easier to fit in more study simply because you just aren't wasting as much time anymore. And you also will find that it's a lot more enjoyable because you're not getting as demotivated from constantly forgetting things, which I'm sure is a feeling that some of you can relate to. So that's the thing with retention, is that we want to make sure that our strategies optimize retention at the very, very beginning, which means the more we forget at the early stages of learning, the more harm we do for ourselves at every stage following that, because we then have to catch up. So on top of having to learn new things, we then have to catch up on what we forgot. And that is, if you can spot it, another spiral that we will go down. So we want to avoid that spiral entirely by just making sure that we do not forget. Now, the reason I'm hammering this point home so much is actually because the stuff that you're learning is actually going to be split up into different components. Part of it is going to be more about the curriculum. It's more going to be about the exam. It's more in that box of schooling. So, for example, your specific English essay or the particular types of questions you're getting asked in maths, you're not going to be able to save a whole lot of time when it comes to the nitty-gritty exam preparation. But the idea is that if we save time elsewhere where we can have time saved, and there's an opportunity to actually condense that and make it a lot faster, then it gives us a lot more free time to spend on the things that we can't speed up so much. So even if we were to learn it here, and let's say that all of this time we're not really super comfortable with all the little nitty-gritty details, that's okay, because learning nitty-gritty details is not something that gets a lot faster. And I will teach you techniques later on that make that type of hardcore memorization easier. However, there is a limit to how fast it's possible to just rote learn and memorize a huge volume of information. So because that amount of time is relatively fixed in your learning process, we want to save time where we can. So if we're able to learn the really difficult concepts, understand it very quickly, see how it all makes sense, and 90% of the learning is done much faster, then even if there is 10% of stuff still left over, we just have so much more free time that it doesn't really matter. We can still overall be saving time. So the reason that I'm mentioning that is because the often students will think, okay, well, I'm teaching a certain system. It should make me really, really good, really, really quickly. And it will, but they're measuring themselves based on how many details they're able to regurgitate, how much they've memorized. So remember, if you've spent your entire life only learning to ride a horse, and your measure of how fast you're going is how hard is the horse panting, how warm is the horse's body to my touch, then when you start driving a car, you're not going to realize what's going on because you're like, oh, I must not be going very fast because the car is very cold, or I don't hear the car panting as much. So if you're trying to measure your progress based on the old techniques that don't work, and you're trying to use those same measurements for this new technique, you're going to find that it just doesn't make sense. Okay, so we're trying to save time on certain aspects, and certain things like nitty-gritty details will come in near the end. But the idea is we save time where we can so that we have more free time available and we can just use it a lot more flexibly.